Anyway, so we're gonna talk about where should I pitch my tent. We're gonna talk about Lot today, not a lot, but some anyway. Abraham's nephew, Lot. Have you ever thought about what kind of situations that we might get ourselves into? Sometimes we are distressed by various problems or things that happen in our lives, and we ask God about them, but they sometimes only seem to get worse. And I think, we think to ourselves maybe, why? Is God trying to test us? Is Satan trying to make my life miserable? Maybe sometimes it's not that, but it's something that we've done to ourselves. Sometimes it could be a problem of our own making. And I think it's important to be able to look honestly at ourselves and determine if that's the case. So the reason why I was thinking about this is because I happened to be reading about Mr. Lot and Abraham in the book of Genesis. And there's a lot of bad things that happened to Lot. And it's because Lot made some bad decisions. But Lot was not a bad person. Lot is actually called righteous. In 2 Peter 2:6-9, he calls him righteous. He says, "And if he condemned the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah to destruction by reducing them to ashes, having made an example of those who would live ungodly lives thereafter, and if he rescued righteous Lot," right? So that means Lot's a righteous person, oppressed by the sensual conduct of unprincipled men. For by what he saw and heard, that righteous man, while living among them, felt his righteous soul tormented day after day by their lawless deeds. So because where Lot lived, he was living in the midst of sin. He was tormented by that sin. He was oppressed by the sensual conduct of unprincipled men. All right, so we're going to talk about more about that. But anyway, then the Lord knows how to rescue the godly from temptation and to keep the unrighteous under punishment for the day of judgment. Right? So God can rescue Lot, even though Lot put himself in a bad situation. But we're going to talk about Lot's situation. So what led up to God delivering Lot from Sodom and Gomorrah? What ultimately brought most of Lot's suffering upon himself? And what can we learn from that? How can we look at Lot's life, look at the decisions that he made, and how can we apply that to ourselves and say, this is something that I should consider in my life? The first big mistake that Lot makes is where he pitches his tent, right? Abram and Lot were having difficulty living side by side because they had large herds, they had lots of money, lots of servants, and their herdsmen were fighting because they had grown very powerful and had lots of money, which, that's not a bad thing. But they had so much stuff that they outgrew each other. They couldn't live side by side anymore. So Abram suggests, Abram is Abraham later on. Well, Abram suggests, hey, Lot, since all our people are fighting and I don't want us to fight, why don't you pick a side, you go to the left or the right, and I'll go to the opposite, whatever you decide. And Lot looks around and he's like, hey, that's looks real nice down there, and he picks that. But we're going to read about that, and we'll talk more about it. So let's read about it first. It says in Genesis 13:8-13, it says, "So Abram said to Lot, please let there be no strife between you and me, nor between my herdsmen and your herdsmen, for we are brothers. Is not the whole land before you? Please separate from me. If to the left, then I will go to the right, or if to the right, I will go to the left. Lot lifted up his eyes, and he saw all the valley of the Jordan, that it was well watered everywhere." And if you want to know where we're talking about by the Dead Sea and the desert, right? But it wasn't a desert in the time of Lot. It was a well-watered, very beautiful valley, and the sea, I guess, wasn't dead. But anyway, that's what we're talking about. And it says, Lot lifted up his eyes, and he saw the valley of the Jordan, that it was well-watered everywhere. This was before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. So, before. Like the garden of the Lord. The garden of the Lord. What do you think about that? The Garden of Eden, huh? Like the land of Egypt as you go to Zoar. So Lot chose for himself all the valley of the Jordan, and Lot journeyed eastward. Thus they separated from each other. Abram settled in the land of Canaan, while Lot settled in the cities of the valley and moved his tents as far as Sodom. Or your Bible might say his tent was facing Sodom, but anyway, close to Sodom. Now the men of Sodom were wicked exceedingly and sinners against the Lord. Okay, so it puts that little tidbit on there, maybe to say Lot's decision wasn't super awesome, right? So basically Lot looked at two options available, the hill country of Canaan and the smooth, green, and well-watered valley of the Jordan. And I think it's interesting to say that the Bible is even comparing it to the Garden of Eden. It's so nice there. Pretty big temptation if you're a herdsman and you're looking to graze your livestock. So Lot decided that that's where he was going to go. He was going to go to that really awesome looking place. Lot, up to this point, had been exceedingly blessed by God. He was incredibly wealthy. He had plenty. Lot, however, wasn't satisfied, I guess, with what he had. He wanted more. And God he wanted more than what God provided to this point. He wanted to kick his riches, his wealth, to the next level. So super mega rich, Think about like maybe Donald Trump to Warren Buffett level, right? So from super rich to mega rich, right? All Lot looked at was the potential opportunities, the prestige that he would gain by moving to this fertile valley, and he ignored the fact that the place is not just evil, not just bad, but exceedingly evil. Sodom were wicked, exceedingly, and sinners against the Lord. So it's like extremely bad, right? So he puts his tents on the outside of the city facing Sodom. So Lot eventually moves into the city because, living outside with your tent facing the wicked, evil city and having the influence of all the people walking by wasn't enough. But also, hey, let's just move in there and hang out with them. But anyway, so Lot moves into the city, and the city's attacked because they rebel against some king, and Abraham and Lot's kidnapped. Abraham has to go and raise up a little army of his men in Canaan, and they go and they rescue Lot, and they get all the money back that Sodom had. They give a tenth to Melchizedek, who is the king of Jerusalem in the land of Canaan, by the way, and on their way back, and basically he restores a lot of the wealth to Sodom, and he puts Lot back in Sodom, and he does his good deed for the day. So after that happens, though, it tells us that Lot is sitting in the city gate. So apparently this gets Lot some credit, because when we're talking about sitting in the city gate is an important place. It was a place where they did lots of legal decisions, and disputes were settled at the city gate. They offered up a lot of sacrifices to gods or even the Lord. In a lot of other cities, Jewish cities might be at the city gate. It was just in a very important place, and so they would put an administrator, somebody that was in charge over stuff. Like a judge or something like that. Not the king of the city or whatever, but a high-up person. And Lot is somebody that's high up. And the reason why, probably because Abraham bought him some serious credit with the king of Sodom. And also, Lot is extremely rich, right? Lot is a very rich herdsman, like Warren Buffett rich. As far as you can be with sheep. You know what I mean? Or goats. But so he's super rich, and he's sitting in the city gate as the person that is the representative of the city. So he's like at the key to the city. He's an important guy. So that's when this happens in Genesis 19, 1-3. It says, "Now the two angels came to Sodom in the evening as Lot was sitting in the gate of Sodom," right? So it's Lot's the one who meets the angels because he's the one that's in charge. "And when Lot saw them, he rose to meet them and bowed with his face to the ground. And he said, 'Now behold, my lords, please turn aside into your servant's house and spend the night and wash your feet. Then you may rise early and go on your way.' And they said, however, 'No, but we shall spend the night in the square.'" It's a nice night, maybe. Look up at the stars, hang out in the city square, the center. "Yet he urged them strongly, so they turned aside to him and entered his house. And he prepared a feast for them and baked unleavened bread, and they ate." He's like, no, don't stay in the square. It's not really nice. Why don't you come inside my house? It's so much better in there. And he's just not telling them what's going to happen to them if they stay out in the gate, out in the square, right? So it is from this position of authority that he grants them the ability to greet the angels, to bring them into the city, and he persuades them to stay at his house, even though the angels want to stay in the square. Because he knows that the people will come out at night, both the young and the old, and they will attempt to sodomize them, right? That's what the name of the city is. We're going to try to avoid using the R word just for because it's a severe sounding word. Just try to avoid it as much as possible. But anyway, I think we know what's going to happen to these guys, or would have happened to them. Lot's actions, they don't go unnoticed. Him skirting them away into his house, locking the door at night, while they demand that the angels be turned over so that they can have their way with them, right? So that leads us to Genesis 19, 4 through 9. It says, before they lay down, the men of the city, the men of Sodom, surrounded the house, both young and old. So everybody, all the people from every quarter. And they called to Lot, and they said to him, where are the men who came to you tonight? Bring them out so that we may have relations with them. But Lot went out to them at the doorway and shut the door behind him and said, please, my brothers, do not act wickedly. Now behold, I have 2 daughters who have not had relations with man. Please let me bring them out to you and do whatever you would like, which is kind of messed up too, but we're talking about levels of depravity here, I guess. Only do nothing to these men, inasmuch as they have come under the shelter of my roof. But they said, stand aside. Furthermore, they said, this one came in as an alien, so he's not a native Sodomite, Lot, and he is already acting like a judge, just because he thinks he's somebody, because he's sitting in the city gate, but he's really nobody, right? That's what they're saying. Now we will treat you worse than them. So their intentions are super bad if they're saying, we're going to treat you worse than them. So they pressed hard against Lot and came near to break the door. So they come to the door demanding to have their way with the angels. Lot offers his daughters, and yeah, that's pretty messed up. There's nothing good about that. But we'll talk more about that, some messed up things that happen with that later. So they refuse, right? The daughters aren't good enough. They want the new people. And then they threaten that they will do even worse to Lot, and if he doesn't turn over these folks. At this point, then the angels intercede, and they blind the mob, so they can't see where they're going or what they're doing. And then the city is basically destroyed, right? So the angels are like, Lot, you got to leave, because we're going to turn this place into a pile of ashes, and it's not going to be a green valley anymore. It's going to be destroyed, right? They say this was before God destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah, so it was really nice. Now it's the Dead Sea, right? But anyway, they are told not to look back on the punishment of Sodom, but Lot's wife does anyway, and she turns to a pillar of salt. Why? Because his sons-in-law also die in the fire, because he tries to convince them to come. So even though he was going to offer his virgin daughters to the mob, they were already betrothed to other Sodomites, but those Sodomites didn't want to go either. So they're like, we're Sodomites. We're happy where we are. We don't care. We're not going to leave. They think that Lot is joking around. So maybe she was looking, maybe my sons-in-law decide to leave. She turns back and looks at the city, and she turns into a pillar of salt. Regardless of what her desires for looking back were, it's hard to know. But I think that she was maybe lamenting the loss of everything. You had all of this wealth, all this power and influence, everything that you could, ever want in the ancient world, and she maybe couldn't let go of that wealth and that prestige that her family had. I'm reminded of a verse like this, Luke 9:24 through 25. It says, for whoever wishes to save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake, he is the one who will save it. For what is a man profited if he gains the whole world and loses or forfeits himself. And I think that's really Lot's story, don't you? Don't you think that's Lot's story? That is Lot's story. Because the world might charm you with all kinds of things, it might promise all kinds of stuff, but in the end, that's what it gives you. It gives you a load of trash. And that's what happens to Lot's life. So Lot loses his wife. He loses his sons-in-law. But he's not done suffering yet. He goes near the cave, to a cave near a town called Zoar, and after escaping the carnage and death of Sodom, his daughters get him drunk, actually, and then they take advantage of their dad because they want to get pregnant, because they lost their husbands or their to-be husbands, and they're like, who are we going to marry? We might as well get dad, you know? So, and then the children that they have become the Ammonites and the Moabites, and those are the two most traditional ancient enemies of Israel. Those are Israel's two worst enemies. And the Moabites even did child sacrifice. They burned their babies at the city gates. So, you know, I guess the wickedness continued. Wickedness rolls into more wickedness. So let's break this down. So Lot chooses wealth, material blessings, and prestige over more important considerations, like not moving to a morally bankrupt and evil place. Right? And we have these kind of verses that we can think about. 2 Corinthians 6:14, do not be bound together with unbelievers, for what partnership have righteousness and lawlessness, or what fellowship has light with darkness? Right? This is something that Lot should have considered before he went to live in Sodom, especially inside the city. Ephesians 5:11, it says, do not participate in the unfruitful deeds of darkness, but instead even expose them. And we know that Lot was at least somewhat partially involved because he's had daughters and they were going to marry Sodomites, and they were definitely happy doing that. 1 Corinthians 15:33 and 34, he says, do not be deceived. Bad company corrupts good morals. Become sober-minded as you ought and stop sinning, for some have no knowledge of God. I speak this to your shame. So these are a few of the warnings in the New Testament not to do the kind of things that Lot did. So even after Lot left, there was consequences. His entire family became evil, corrupted, and tainted by the immorality and the sin that they were marinating in. His wife looked back in defiance of God's command. His sons-in-laws died in a fire. Loving the world, his daughters committed unspeakable immoral acts and fathered morally bankrupt enemy nations of Israel. So if we think about all that, you know, he's brought up his kids in an evil place, and his kids became evil. So all of this happened because of Lot's love of money, prestige, and maybe easy living, because of those choices that he made. His priorities were for himself, not for what was truly the best for his whole family. And, you know, money and prestige are not things that matter to God, and in fact often carry with them consequences because they are things which the world values above everything else. So think about this. Jesus was offered a similar bargain to Lot, except Jesus was offered a whole lot more. And it's the ultimate temptation that Satan comes up with. When we look at Matthew 4:8 through 11, he says, and again, the devil took him to a very high mountain and showed him all the kingdoms of the world and their glory. And he said to him, all these things I will give you if you fall down and worship me. Then Jesus said to him, go, Satan, for it is written, you shall worship the Lord your God and serve him only. Then the devil left him, and behold, angels came and began to minister to him. So what we learn, see, Jesus made the right decision, but anyway, what we learn from Lot's suffering and struggle is that it is not worth it to pursue worldly gain at the expense of righteous living. That morality and goodness and righteousness are worth something in a person's life. That they are worth something in your life, and not only your life, but your family's life, your children's lives. That setting a good example and doing the right things is important. It's important to God, and it matters in the future of your family's life. You know, Abraham moved into the less desirable hill country of Canaan, but God watched over him and he caused him to prosper, didn't he? Abraham also had a family that continued to serve God, even becoming God's chosen people, the Jews, and then ultimately giving us the Messiah, Jesus Christ. See, Abraham cared more about serving God than he did about serving himself. And that's the lesson that I think that we can all learn from Lot's decision. Lot wasn't a bad, evil person, but he made a bad decision. And we all make them. We all make bad decisions. But when we make life decisions, when we decide what we're going to do with our life, it's not all about money. It's not all about power and prestige. It's not all about easy living. That there's other things to consider. We should always consider our faith, our church, our loved ones, everyone around us before we make decisions on our own. It's important to consider God in everything that we do, because when we don't, we ultimately pay a heavy consequence, a heavy price. We should not compromise a righteous life to gain something worldly. Anyway, I think that's what Lot teaches us. At this time, I would like to offer an invitation. Anybody that wants to come forward. If you have not yet been baptized, if you believe in Jesus Christ and you repent of your sins, and you're willing to be baptized, I want to encourage you to come forward as we stand and we sing, "Who Will Follow Jesus?"